Hello, beautiful community. I'm just gonna gather you here for a tiny bit to share my thoughts about Kakhovka. When I'm not so well, I sometimes just talk through with you a Twitter thread I've written. I don't actually write the Twitter threads for Twitter, I write them for you so that we can talk them through after. And this is what we'll do now. And here are my sort of jumbled thoughts about it. We've got to talk about just the human impact. So it's hard to measure the human cost of this, and today our thoughts are with the most vulnerable, the ill, the disabled, the elderly, but of course also the human and ecological consequences will ripple for years. I'm sometimes asked what's better, having some particular health condition or some particular form of physical suffering in the Western world where it's peaceful, or being physically healthy in a calamitous part of the world. And the answer is actually, you can make these comparisons. You can absolutely say that, certain political situations are worse than certain health conditions are worse than virtually any political situation you can face. But the real answer is both. It's both, So a lot of the folks who've been impacted by this today, among them, there are going to be people who are sick, who are disabled, who are just, struggling through age. And, that's the sort of way in which war and then unnatural disasters caused by Russia within a war are sort of magnifiers of everything else. So the answer to these kinds of questions always is both. Now, there is also some indication that Russian troops have been obstructing evacuation. And before saying a bit more politically, it's worth saying a bit about the origins of the dam that are themselves a destructive expression of the Soviet project of subjugating nature. And so when this thing, appeared in the middle of the 20th century, there were significant human and ecological costs. And one of the things that's really important to understand is that there were features of the Soviet project that aren't talked about enough. One is this business of ecological calamitousness, mastery via technological progress over nature, which supposedly moves one to human perfectibility. In fact, that's a very Western ideal. And the Soviet project was a very Western project. In some ways, it was a more Western project than some of the politics we've seen in the West. In others, it wasn't. And one of these very much Western features is this business of instrumentalization of nature. And of course, the other business is radically underplayed that a lot of people have only learned about recently, is the extent to which the Soviet Union was at war with the nationalities, right? And the degree to which that was actually central to the collapse of the Soviet Union. Because all too often you hear stuff about economic inefficiency and so on, but that's actually an important story, but it's not as absolutely central as people say. Who done it? Well, I just say it's Russia is responsible and rage is appropriate. Let the relevant experts settle whether this was a deliberate positive action, that would entail something like blowing it up, or a deliberate omission to act, intending the consequences. And I'm not going to contribute to the weighing of these possibilities, but there certainly seems to be some evidence that certain safety procedures were intentionally stopped by the Russians. Or if it's not an intentional positive act or an intentional omission to act to bring about certain consequences. It's either way a product of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we can say that Russia is responsible and Russia caused it, probably comfortably now. However, the details settle. How has Russian propaganda reacted to this? Well, it's been a standard story of an ill-assorted epistemic salad, plus claiming that the Russians are always the victims. And that included, let's not rush to conclusions, Ukraine blew it up, the Anglo-Saxons did it, Russia has no motive to do this, we're so poor, the West always blames us and nobody can know anything about anything. Another theme now, a lot of jibes at climate advocates, climate activists and climate scientists who are communicators today. Where are you, climate communicators now? You know, where are you, Greta? Where are you, Michael Mann, and so on? And these jibes are grifts, and they are inappropriate, partly because a lot of these folks are with Ukraine. But putting this grift aside, it's a tricky business to balance this for a climate communicator, because you need to center Ukraine, but you also need to center global climate crisis, potentially other ecocides. And where are you, Miss Climate Advocate, is wrong, but it's also wrong to say it's not just about Ukraine, as a couple of climate advocates have. Today, it is about Ukraine, I'm afraid. My brief political analysis to end with. Russia cannot go on wreaking this level of havoc in its current shape. The Russian state cannot go on doing this in its current shape. So to manage the consequences of its actions, it will need to adapt further. And further totalitarian turns are to come. When the war began, Russia took a set of totalitarian turns, and then that momentum continued at a much, much slower pace. The number of turns they took ain't gonna be enough to allow them to keep getting away with all the things they're doing. And this is not a straightforward picture, because it's not as though the Russian state has something it wants to do and then it can just go ahead and do it. Because just as much as the Russian state is keen to go more totalitarian, it's also conscious of it being sort of stuck in mud with its wheels spinning. It's running out of capacity in many ways, right? The Russian state is, in some respects, in a dynamic of pulling levers and nothing happening as a result. So that's an interesting balance. And I think that it's helpful here to think in terms of, greater tyranny or greater anarchy, or perhaps a blend of both. But then over and above that sits this predicament that the population don't look terribly totalitarian in format. The population are a typical authoritarian state population in their radical depoliticization. And depoliticization in Russia is especially radical. And these totalitarian turns do require more politicization from the population, but the regime is aware that it may not be able to control that process, that it may not be able to get the outcome it wants, and that if it pushes the population too early in a certain direction, it's just not going to work. So, Putin is building towards some kind of big confrontation with the West in years to come, hoping there's going to be capacity for it, hoping that the population will be available to him that's ready for it, which he does not have now. And we're going to say more about that in our counteroffensive video on the main channel that should come tomorrow evening. So lots of love and talk soon.